The state of green jobs is a bit precarious right now, right? I'm sure all of you keep up with the news, and whether it's rollbacks to the EPA, to US aid, to the NSF, so many major funders and institutions that a lot of research institutions, nonprofits, even companies are falling through. And we're seeing grants being revoked by the day. And I've never seen a situation where multiple times a week I'll have people call me up that I barely know and be like, "Hey, my cousin's sister is studying environmental science and about to graduate. She can't get a job. What do I do?" At the same time, we're at this moment where there are so many incredible leaders really pushing forward and building community, finding philanthropy, finding the money, creating the opportunities to grow. And so today, what we really want to focus on is the state of green jobs. Is it as bad as it looks? Is the space growing? How can we continue to bring our own selves into this space to grow, to find opportunities for ourselves, and to build out for our communities? I think there's a lot of hope, but let's see what our lovely panelists have to say. I'd love to start by having each of you introduce yourselves and share a little bit about yourselves. So if you want to start, Jason.
Oh no, señoritas primera.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? We're good. Excellent. Hi, everybody. My name is Camarillo. It is a privilege to be here with you all at this wonderful event. I am an international lawyer. I focus on climate justice, human rights, and global trade. And I am currently the research director at Public Citizens Global Trade Watch.
Lovely. My name is Stefan Jacob, one of the founders of Cotopaxi. We're an outdoor gear brand with a deeply ingrained humanitarian and social mission. Excited to be part of this.
Hi, I'm Jason Seedall. I am the director and one of the founders of the Roosevelt Initiative, a 501c4 that promotes policy that channels the life and legacy of Theodore Roosevelt. And we focus a lot on natural resources as a big part of our policy. And that's most of what I do on a daily basis, both in the Intermountain West and in D.C.
Wonderful. Thank you all for that introduction. Aren't we so lucky to have such incredible, accomplished speakers with us today? I want to start by talking about the situation that we're in. You each have very different perspectives in your sort of environmental action lens, whether that is policy, environmental justice, from the business side as well. I'd love to know, generally, right now, looking at the world, what is your opinion on the state of green jobs? Maybe we can start with you, Stefan. I know you employ a lot of people yourself.
Everything you said in your introduction is true in terms of federal funding being revoked, a shift in maybe public mindset or at least the narrative around climate protection, conservation. At the same time, I think conservation and climate is one of the very few nonpartisan or less partisan topics. When Mike Lee, senator from my beautiful state of Utah, made a suggestion in June to sell off millions of acres of federal land, it was an uproar on both sides, right? On progressive conservation groups, Sierra Club, etc., as well as hunter, hook and bullet, type communities. And so I remain very, very hopeful that despite some of the federal maybe pushback on what we took for granted in terms of funding and programs and whatnot, that there is a strong societal consensus around the environment, around preserving the spaces that we recreate in, and so I remain very hopeful. Secondly, I think that organizations, I believe, will pick up some of that slack. Right? Maybe we're moving from a federally mandated regulatory push towards conservation to a more corporate driven, and we as an organization absolutely embrace that. We do believe that operating sustainably is not just good for the environment, it's good for business, right? And so we fully embrace that, fully built that into how we operate, and so I remain eternally hopeful.
Well, I love that. And I think, when we see so many people dropping the ball on these challenges, we need people to pick it up. So we all appreciate the work that you're doing. Isa, I know you do so much in environmental justice, and it's an interesting time for environmental justice. I'd love to hear your take on the intersection of that, the work that you do, and the current state of green jobs.
Of course, I'm going to echo the hopefulness, because even though it may seem difficult to believe, we are actually hiring now more than ever. And it's because for as long as there are problems, we will be looking for solutions. And so, yes, the market is very competitive and it's competitive across the board, but that doesn't mean that there aren't jobs. The best thing that I think job seekers can do is really set themselves apart. And we can get into that. We can talk a little bit more of what makes it competitive in the environmental justice sphere. But I will say that it's very interesting in the policy space in DC because as federal rollbacks are taking place, what we're seeing is more demand from people themselves who are giving and donating to organizations who are demanding answers, they're demanding solutions. And so organizations like mine, Public Citizen, and many, many others are looking for talented people to carry that work forward. So I would say don't despair. Yes, it's hard, but it's not impossible. And for talented people, there will always be a solution.
Well, Isa, before we jump to Jason's thoughts on this, I'm sure everyone's wondering if someone like you is looking at a resume, what does make someone competitive?
That's a really good question. I was fortunate enough to look at 20 resumes actually before coming here today for one of the roles that we have. And the one thing that really, really stood out that I can tell you all is I am always impressed by somebody who can show me, even if their career trajectory was not straight through, that they pivoted in a very, very smart and cohesive way. So I'll share my background as an experience. I'm an attorney. However, now I do research and advocacy as well on top of litigation. So for some, it may look like I took a hard turn. However, that's not the case. I've simply brought the experience from my previous job and weaved it into a new one and then created for myself a role that did not exist when I was applying. The role has morphed with me. And so I'm always interested in people that can translate law, policy, many, many spaces. And I'm sure that the same is true for corporations as well. You want somebody that is flexible, adaptable, because that often means that you're resilient. And that is a very, very valuable skill to have in the job market.
Can I ask a kind of shady question? As you were looking at these 20 resumes today, what was the biggest red flag that you saw?
I love that question. I'll be candid. I think climate has become a bit of a buzzword, and funders know that, employers know that. And so for many people, it's kind of a throwaway. Like, oh, I do climate. I do this on climate. Show me what that means to you. Show me. And I'm not saying be the foremost environmental scientist or environmental advocate, but show me what that really means to you. Tell me a story in your resume. Does climate to you mean community resistance? Does it mean even from a more corporate or even IT component? What does that really mean to you? Or did you just throw climate in there because that's what the job title is asking?
No, I love that. And I see people vigorously taking notes. So I think that's a really good thing to note. I also learned very quickly here at Climate Week, this is not my Climate Week, but my warning to you is when people are like, hey, nice to meet you. What do you do? Don't just say, I work in climate. Because this week everybody does. So, maybe get a little bit deeper and more specific with what that means to you. Jason, I know that you at the Roosevelt Institute have do so much in the policy scope of things. Can you share to us, as people are very concerned about our current political environment, what does the state of green jobs mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that you asking it. So, what I see from my work with the Roosevelt Initiative, especially with policy in DC and at a federal level, is a lot of optimism and reason to be optimistic because of both sides. I come from a conservative background. I'm from the Mountain West, a very conservative place, and I'm seeing a very bipartisan focus on an idea of abundance, whether that's an abundance of energy, an abundance of employment, abundance of opportunity for Americans. And just as a greater expansion of opportunity occurs, that means a greater expansion of green jobs opportunity is going to occur. I believe that as costs for energy production and renewable sources has dropped dramatically with a 70 to 90% reduction in solar costs over the last 10 years. There's a lot of reason to believe that working in something like the solar industry or in the renewable energy industry, there are just going to be more green jobs as people want cheaper energy, as they want more opportunities. A story that's kind of personal to me is it's right in my neck of the woods in Wyoming. There was an old coal town that for 100 years, that's all they were, was about 1,000 people who worked in a local coal plant. It's called Kemmerer, Wyoming. And the coal plant was shut down over the fact that coal is no longer as viable, it's too expensive, and a lot of the regulatory concerns over it. Now there is nuclear power going in nearby, and for a long time that town thought that 2031, I mean that's only 6 years from now, 2031 people would not be able to live in that town any longer because there would be no jobs as the coal shut down. But now, starting lots for home lots, the prices are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars because people want to have those kind of jobs. They want to work in that nuclear industry. They want to work there. It's providing so much new opportunity. And if it can happen in Wyoming, I think it can happen anywhere in the United States.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think just as people are feeling very maybe hopeless about some of these federal rollbacks, I'd love to know what market forces do you think people should be paying attention to in this moment as we're seeing so much change in what we saw under the last administration?
Sure, that's another great question. I think there's a great book that if you guys have read it, it's called Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. I highly recommend it. Where in there they discuss that the federal government did a great job of taking the burden of the cost of new technologies, whether it was solar, whether it was wind, a lot of these newer technologies, and now the market can afford to take them on. Like I mentioned, the solar costs are being reduced so heavily. Now the amount of jobs that are being created in that space, I think the market forces are simply that the market will do what is best for itself, will it not? And now that even though there's a lot of the Inflationary Reduction Act funding is drying up, there's still so much more to be had. The Inflationary Reduction Act was supposed to be about $393 billion over the course of 10 years. I mean, it grew. It's closer to maybe $1 trillion over it of being spent towards renewables. In 1 year, American consumers spent 1.7 trillion on energy. So every year we put more into energy than the entire Inflation Reduction Act did over 10 years, or was supposed to over 10 years. So even as those have gone, there's still a lot of reason to be optimistic that market forces are pushing people towards green jobs everywhere. And I think that's something to be very excited about.
No, that's a really good point. And I do think we're amidst the clean energy revolution. You know, just on Sunday, we had the big Sunday march led by Bill McKibben here in New York. I don't know if any of you were following, but, really seeing how I wouldn't say the solar and the clean energy revolution is inevitable. We still have to make an active effort. But at the same time, it's underway. It is the cheapest source of energy that we're having these days. And those market forces don't lie. And when we look to the business community, Stefan, I know that Cotopaxi does so much work in social impact. Sustainability is so core to what you do. How do you, in this current environment, keep that core to what you're doing? And what does sustainable growth look like to you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. For us, it's not something that we picked up because it was trendy or cool. It's before we even knew who we were going to be, what kind of product we were going to make. We knew that we wanted to be an organization built around the notion of doing good and having sort of that measurable human impact. And that was largely based on my experience. I was working for a nonprofit. My wife is half Indonesian. I was working for a nonprofit organization that was dedicated to the elimination of child labor on the Indonesian archipelago, and it was a wonderful experience, both in terms of federal and municipal anti-child labor legislation that we passed, taking hundreds of kids from fishing platform and factories back into their schools and their communities. And it left a mark, right? That I, having grown up in Western Europe and Germany, didn't have to worry about the things that these, families had to deal with. And they had no lesser aspirations or dreams. They were simply born in a hard place. And that realization is at the core of why we started Cotopaxi in the first place, right? Before we had sold a single product, and co-founder had very similar experiences. And so and that's the one thing, like 10 years in, right? I'm as passionate about that as I was on day zero. And we tell these stories. We try to bring them to life. Annie Agel, who is our VP of Impact, makes every effort to not just have our impact program exist in an ivory tower, like locked away, but like have impact and action sessions with the team, volunteer efforts, like really tell these stories of our grantees right in country and really bring that to life on a day-to-day basis. So it's real, it's embedded. That's why people come to Cotopaxi. That way we have, a tenure where people want to stick around, right? It's a calling for a lot of folks as opposed to just a career or a job.
No, I love that. And I think, so many people are trying to get into the space right now. You carved your whole own niche. You made your own company. Is there something you would say to some of the young entrepreneurs right now who are watching, looking at you and being like, how do I do that? Where do I start?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is mindset, right? Like you alluded to that. I was at a dinner last night. Jacinta Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, was speaking, and she quoted one of my personal heroes, Ernest Shackleton. Right? Many of you will probably know his story, right? It was an Antarctic explorer at the turn of the century. He got stuck in the ice for almost 2 years. His entire crew survived. He got them through that, right? And he's quoted to say that optimism is the ultimate moral courage. You need to have a plan, and he was really strict about this is what we're doing, this is how we're surviving. He squashed any naysayers and demanded optimism from his team throughout the entire 2 years, and they all made it through. And so I think showcasing that as a candidate, as we interview, as we like look to add to the team, that is one quality that we are absolutely looking for.
No, I think that's incredible advice. And I love Jacinda Ardern. So very cool to be having a dinner with her casual. Isa, I feel like you've done so much work in so many different spaces. I know environmental justice is very important to you. It's also super core to what I do. And, over the last few years, it has become something that people know about, right? I think we weren't having a conversation focused on environmental justice and climate justice in a very public way until the last few years. And, I remember I was at the White House when they launched the Office for Environmental Justice, a very exciting moment where, they were making a promise to incorporate environmental justice into every single department across the White House and federally. Very cool, very exciting. However, that has since been repealed, and oh no, that sucks. So, amid such a turbulent policy environment, when we see so many market forces changing, how do you tell people, what advice would you give to people in terms of staying resilient and staying competitive amidst this job market? As things are rapidly changing, what is it that people are looking for? And how do you keep environmental justice, if it's an issue that's important to you, something that's still marketable and that people are interested in?
Yeah, I think things are changing rapidly for sure. We can't discount that. What I will say is that unfortunately, with environmental justice, it feels like every victory is really hard won. And then every setback just, comes with a flourish of a pen. And now we're miles and miles behind. And I think that job seekers often feel the same way too, right? And so I think it's a bit of a parallel. And the solution, I would say, is the same. And it's to do the next best thing. So maybe the job that you're looking into, it's not the perfect fit, but it's similar enough, it's close enough. And if you see that there's opportunities while you're in that role to diversify and to learn different skills and to possibly make that into a different platform and go from there, then at least you're doing the next right thing. And it's the same thing that we do with climate policy, right? I mean, they repeal all of these things, and now we can't say, well, the next thing is going to be the thing that gives environmental justice for all. That's just not the way it works. But maybe in a small, sustainable way, we can make headway. And so I would say don't get discouraged. I know it's really hard and it feels that way, especially with a lot of our victories. I've even had some cases that I worked on 10 years ago that have since been reopened and issues have, continue to be contentious. And I look at the communities that are suffering it and it's really, really disheartening. But again, the way that we get through that is the same way that you're all going to get to your next new job. And it's just doing the next best thing.
No, that's a really good point, and I think very inspiring for the moment that we're in. I feel like each of you have such an interesting take on green jobs, given the different kind of throughways that you went throughout your career. I know a lot of folks here are either starting their green job search or they're in the environmental world, perhaps looking for new jobs. So I want to ask each of you, as you were starting your own journey, what green job skills do you think you had? And along the way, what skills have you realized are important? I'd love to start with you, Jason.
I think one of the most important skills, whether you're working in an environmental job, a green job, or any job, but I will say especially in something as diverse and kind of crazy as green jobs, is collaboration instead of compromise. I think there are too many perspectives across the entire U.S. of people who want to do what is best for their country or do what is best for their company, for their job, that to find a way to compromise is only one way to progress. But being able to collaborate with people who are so different from you, who have such different backgrounds than you, but have a diverse perspective that you can't have because of where you come from versus what they have. Being able to collaborate between people from California, Wyoming, New York, Texas, with wildly different backgrounds is essential, in my opinion, to pushing forward the state of green jobs. And I would highly recommend everyone to make sure to understand that your fellow American, your fellow citizen, your fellow worker, all of them, they may come from somewhere different, but they are most likely a good person at heart, and they want to do what is just as good for your company or for your corporation or for your country as you do. And being able to respect that and find a way to collaborate that is a win for both parties in some way is indispensable. And I have found that to be the most important thing that I was able to learn in my career.
Yeah. Collaboration over compromise. You sound like my therapist. Uh,
My wife's a therapist, so that's probably why.
well, there you go. I know we have to start wrapping up, but I'd love to hear from you, Isa, and from you, Stefan, before. What one token, if people are walking away from this today, do you think you want people to ruminate throughout the day as they're thinking about the future of our economy?
I'll give a piece of practical advice for many of you who are just getting into the climate space. I see so many young faces, and I'm assuming that for many of you, you're looking at your first or maybe even second job. And so I would say that if you're passionate about climate but haven't started yet, see what you have done. Maybe it's research, maybe it's writing, maybe it's IT, I don't know. And take a look at that and see what you really want to be doing. And try to find at least one common thread that you can pull and actively work on. So, for example, if you're a writer, write about climate, even if it's a Substack, even if it's a blog post, whatever it can be. But I think that there are very practical ways that are in your hands today without an employer validating it for you, that you could say, I am a climate writer. I am a climate activist. I am an advocate. And take that ownership, because it's no one's to give you. It's yours to take, I think, at this point where we're at. Thank you.
I love that. You are the authority figure of yourself. So you get to define yourself. You get to tell people who you are. Don't let other people do that for you. I love that advice. Stefan, what would you say?
Yeah, on that same note, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies the power to choose your response. And in that response lies your growth and your freedom. It's typically attributed to Viktor Frankl. I think incorrectly. I think Stephen Covey was actually the one to popularize that quote. But it exactly on the note that you mentioned, you control how you respond to the environment. And we can go up the walls and freak out about what the federal government does, but that doesn't help anybody. We can choose the organizations that we associate with. We can choose how we spend our money, the jobs that we choose to take, the dollars that we choose to donate. And I think therein lies the power. That we're not helpless. We're not victims of the current political climate. We can very much proactively shape where our journey goes and where the journey of this country goes. And by the way, this whole climate rollback, it's a very American conversation. If you speak to anybody in Europe, if you speak to anybody in Asia, very different story. So let's not get bogged down by what we can't control.
I love that. I feel like this has been very therapeutic, compromise and collaboration. We're talking about defining who you are. We're talking about looking at your perspective amidst the entire world. There are so many ways that a lot of things might feel out of your control, but actually I think we are in charge of our own destiny. And so I hope that as you go forward with your climate week, as you go forward with all the different events today at the Nest, you really internalize a lot of this advice in your search for jobs. There are opportunities out there. There are people doing the work, and all the people here are a testament to that. I want to encourage you to follow everybody on the panel on Instagram or shoot a LinkedIn request if anything that they've said has resonated with you. Thank you so much for being here for this conversation. I'm feeling a lot more uplifted. And a huge shout out to Green Jobs Board and to Christy Drutman for all the incredible work that she does to really change the world of green jobs. We love you, Christy.
amazing. Can we get a round of applause for our amazing panelists?